This time, the story doesn't unfold in a studio, on a stage, or in front of cameras for reality TV. No, this story takes place in a brand new house, one that King has claimed as his own, away from the watchful eyes and protective rules of his parents. A house where he lives with his closest friends, trying to prove to himself and the world that he's grown enough to make it on his own. But when word of this new setup reaches T.I., he decides it's time to pay his son a personal visit. What happens next is a clash of generations, perspectives, and egos, but also a powerful reminder of what it really means to grow up, to become independent, and to carry the weight of your last name. From the outside, King's new house looks like the type of spot any young man would dream of having in his late teens or early 20s. It's not a mansion, but it's stylish enough to flex on Instagram. The driveway still smells of fresh pavement, the walls are newly painted, and the neighborhood is buzzing with energy. It's the kind of place where freedom hangs in the air. No curfews, no parents telling you to clean your room, no constant lectures about discipline. Just music, laughter, and the sound of life being lived the way you want to live it. For King, this house represented more than just four walls and a roof. It was a statement. Growing up in a household where both parents, T.I. and Tiny, were public figures, he was constantly seen as the kid who had everything handed to him. But for King, leaving his parents' home wasn't just about escaping the rules. It was about proving that he could stand on his own 2 feet. He wanted to show the world, and maybe even more importantly himself, that he could take care of business outside of his parents' shadow. And so he did what many young men do when they first move out. He called up his closest friends and told them to come through. Before long, the house was filled with voices, energy, and the kind of chaos that only happens when you put too many young people under the same roof with not enough structure. The fridge was packed with snacks, the living room was turned into a makeshift studio at times, and the nights often stretched until sunrise. From the outside looking in, it looked like King was living his best life. But on the inside, things weren't as picture-perfect as they seemed. Bills were piling up, chores were getting ignored, the line between freedom and recklessness was starting to blur. And when you're young, those cracks in the foundation aren't always obvious until someone older comes around to point them out. That someone, in this case, was T.I. When T.I. heard about King's new living arrangement, he wasn't exactly thrilled. As a father who had built an empire through discipline, hustle, and business smarts, he knew how hard it was to maintain stability in life. To him, independence wasn't just about moving out of your parents' house. It was about paying your own way, keeping order, and making sure that you were truly prepared for the responsibilities that came with adulthood. So, hearing that King had moved in with his friends raised red flags. Was this about genuine growth? Or was it just rebellion disguised as maturity? So one day, T.I. decided to pull up to the new house himself. He didn't announce his visit, he didn't give a warning, and he didn't plan a casual stop-by. He came with purpose. He wanted to see with his own eyes the life his son was trying to build outside of his roof. When he arrived, the first thing he noticed was the vibe. Music poured through the walls before he even stepped inside. Cars were parked a little too close to the curb. The lawn was starting to look like nobody cared for it. Small details, but to a man like T.I., they were signs. Signs that the household wasn't being run with the kind of care and order he believed a grown man should maintain. Inside, the scene was exactly what he expected. King and his boys lounging around, laughing, joking, and living carefree. Empty cups and fast food bags on the counters. Sneakers piled by the door, a living room that looked more like a hangout spot than a home. On the surface, it looked fun, but to T.I., it looked like a crash course in irresponsibility waiting to happen. As he walked through the house, his eyes took everything in. The unwashed dishes, the clutter, the lack of structure. It wasn't about judging, it was about recognizing. He saw the same mistakes he once made at that age, but he also knew the difference. He didn't have a safety net when he was coming up. He had to figure out survival the hard way. For King, things were different, and that difference made T.I. question whether his son truly understood what independence meant. However, The house itself was a symbol of freedom for King. It wasn't extravagant like the mansions he had grown up in, but it was his. The furniture was modern, the energy was youthful, and the space carried the feeling of a new chapter. For King, this wasn't just a place to sleep. It was proof that he could create his own life, outside of the rules and expectations that had shaped him since childhood. Here, he wasn't just the son of T.I., he was King Harris, living on his own, with his chosen family of friends and, most importantly, his boyfriend by his side. The walls carried laughter, music, and the unspoken relief of being free from constant judgment. But with freedom comes responsibility, and with responsibility comes the unavoidable reality that people will question whether you're truly ready for it. On this particular day, King and his boyfriend were lounging in the living room, enjoying the comfort of their space, when the sudden, heavy sound of knocking echoed through the house. At first, it was just 3 sharp thuds on the wooden door. But even from that first knock, King recognized the sound. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't a delivery driver. It wasn't one of his friends dropping by. It was his father. The weight behind the knock, the rhythm of it, the insistence in each pound against the door. It was unmistakable. And in that moment, the atmosphere in the house shifted from lighthearted to tense. For T.I., the decision to come knocking wasn't casual. He'd heard rumors and whispers about King's new living arrangement, about how he was living with his boyfriend and friends in a house that, from the outside, looked more like a hangout spot than a home. As a father, he wanted answers. He wanted to see with his own eyes how his son was living. And so he pulled up, without warning, ready to confront whatever was waiting on the other side of that door. Each knock carried not just sound, but intention. It was a declaration. I'm here. I know you're inside, and I won't be ignored.
Inside, however, the reaction was far from welcoming. King and his boyfriend froze where they sat, their eyes locked, and without saying a word, they both knew they weren't ready for this moment. The house wasn't clean. Their nerves weren't steady, and more than anything, they weren't prepared to face T.I.'s questions, his disappointment, or his criticism. So they did what many young people might do when caught in a moment of fear. They stayed still, as if silence could make them invisible. The knocking grew louder. T.I. wasn't going away. He shifted from knocking to pounding, his voice occasionally cutting through the silence as he called out for King. The sound echoed through the small house, bouncing off the walls and sinking into the silence of the living room where King and his boyfriend sat, holding their breath. Every pound on the door felt heavier than the last, like a drumbeat of expectation and confrontation. And yet, inside, there was nothing but quiet hesitation. King crept toward the door at one point, moving slowly, careful not to make a sound that might give him away. He stood there, inches away from the handle, listening to his father's voice on the other side. His heart pounded in rhythm with the knocking, but he couldn't bring himself to twist the knob. To open that door meant to face everything he was avoiding, the questions about his choices, the criticisms about the house, the judgments about his independence. And so he stood frozen, while his father knocked just a thin layer of wood away. For his boyfriend, the fear wasn't just about the confrontation. It was about what T.I.'s presence symbolized. This wasn't just a father checking on his son. This was an authority figure, a man who carried respect and intimidation, standing at their front door, demanding entry. To open that door would be to invite judgment into their private space, a space they had worked to build as their own. And so the two of them sat in silence, trading nervous glances as the knocking persisted, each hoping the other would make a decision neither of them wanted to make. After what felt like an eternity, the knocking began to slow. T.I. wasn't getting an answer, but he wasn't the type to walk away quietly either. He lingered, pacing outside the door, occasionally peeking through the blinds of nearby windows, shaking his head as though he already knew his son was inside, hiding. For him, it was frustrating. For King, it was terrifying. Two perspectives, two hearts beating on opposite sides of the same door, divided not by wood, but by fear and pride. Finally, after minutes that felt like hours, T.I. stepped back from the door. He pulled out his phone, muttered something under his breath, and walked toward his car. Inside, King and his boyfriend exhaled in unison, the tension finally releasing from their shoulders. The sound of the engine starting was like a bell ringing to mark the end of a round in a boxing match, except no punches had been thrown and no words had been exchanged. Still, the emotional weight was just as heavy. King knew in that moment that this wasn't the end. His father had come knocking once, and he would come again. T.I. wasn't the type to let unanswered doors stay closed forever. There would be another visit, another confrontation, another moment when hiding in silence wouldn't be an option. For now, though, the storm had passed. The house was quiet again, the door remained closed, and King, sitting back on the couch beside his boyfriend, felt both relief and dread at the same time. Now, to understand the weight of this confrontation, you have to understand the dynamic between father and son. T.I. has always been outspoken, a man who speaks his mind and enforces his values directly. King, on the other hand, has always had a fiery, independent streak. He's bold, unapologetic, and determined to prove he's not just the son of T.I. That combination, a father who demands discipline and a son who craves freedom, was bound to create fireworks. Standing there in that house, T.I. couldn't help but lecture in his own way, not through long speeches this time, but through his presence and his observations. Every corner of that house told a story. To him, it wasn't just about dirty dishes or loud music, it was about what those things represented. A lack of order, a lack of accountability, a sense that maybe his son had rushed into adulthood without fully understanding the responsibility that came with it. But here's the thing, King didn't see it that way. To him, this house was proof of growth. It was proof that he could move out, gather his circle, and live outside of his parents' roof. He felt that by simply having the courage to step out, he was already winning. The messy house, the bills, the noise, those were just growing pains, part of the process of figuring it all out. And in his mind, his father showing up unannounced was more about control than concern. That's where the real clash existed, not in the mess of the house or the friends in the living room, but in the difference between how each man defined adulthood. For T.I., adulthood meant discipline, responsibility, order, and providing for yourself in every sense. For King, adulthood meant freedom, space, independence, and the right to make mistakes along the way. Two definitions of the same word, standing under the same roof, staring each other down. What makes this story so fascinating isn't just the tension between father and son, but the lessons embedded in it. For every young person, there comes a time when they want to step out on their own, away from the protection of family, to test themselves against the real world. And for every parent, there comes a time when they have to let go, even if they don't believe their child is fully ready. That push and pull between freedom and guidance, between independence and protection, is universal. It just so happens that in this case, it's playing out between one of hip-hop's most recognizable figures and his equally outspoken son. The visit didn't end with shouting matches or dramatic exits. Instead, it ended with reflection. T.I. saw that his son was determined, even if unprepared. King saw that his father's criticism wasn't just about control, but about love and experience. The messy house, the clutter, the noise, all of that could be cleaned up. What mattered more was the respect and understanding that had to be built between them. By the time T.I. left, there was no doubt that King had a long way to go in his journey towards true independence. But there was also no doubt that he had the courage to start that journey, even if it meant stumbling along the way. And for T.I., the lesson was clear as well. Sometimes you have to let your children fall, not because you want them to fail, but because falling is how they learn to stand stronger. And that's the story of the day T.I. pulled up to confront King Harris in his new house. A moment that wasn't just about a messy home or loud friends, but about the timeless struggle between generations, between the wisdom of the past and the hunger of the future. But what do you think, though? Should King be left alone to figure it out on his own, or was T.I. right to step in and check things early? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories just like this. Until next time, stay tuned.